Hello, everyone. My name is Frances Widdowson, and I was a professor who was wrongly terminated from Mount Royal University in December 2021. And one of the reasons why I was terminated was because I was challenging many of the arguments that were being made about the residential schools and whether or not the residential schools were genocidal. There is a controversy that is ongoing now in British Columbia, which involves the MLA Dallas Brodie. And it's very important that people pay attention to this controversy and become involved, because it appears that the leader of the Conservative Party, John Rustad, is a very weak leader. There's no getting around it. And so Rustad is going to respond to pressure that is placed upon him. And the idea now is we need to organize and mount pressure so that Dallas Brodie will not be canceled. If Dallas Brodie is canceled for what she has done, which is just defending truth in general, but also more specifically with respect to the legal system, this will be a serious blow to our ability to discuss these very, very important issues that are now facing us in Canadian society and around the world more generally. So what I've done is I have created a post on the most relevant documents that have appeared recently, and I just want to go through these documents with you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen so that we can take a look at the wokeacademy.info site. So what I do to help people is I do a post on the wokeacademy.info site, so you have all the materials that are available for you so that you can go look at. But also I want to explain the importance of the documents that are on the wokeacademy.info site. So this is the site here, www.wokeacademy.info. It's got many important documents on the arbitration decision, which happened in July 2024, but also it has, background to all the things that happened to me while I was a professor at Mount Royal University, which are related to this issue. And having been canceled myself, I'm very sensitive to other people being canceled, because I think this is a very, very dangerous bunch of processes that are happening. Because if you cancel someone and you punish them for putting forth ideas, even if those ideas have some flaws and perhaps even if they're wrong, we need to discuss those ideas and not push them out of public discourse. And that is the danger that we are facing right now. So this is the post that I'm talking about here, which is on the right-hand side. The attempts to cancel Dallas Brodie and truth. So it's not just about canceling Brodie, it's about canceling this very important area whereby we are actually able to state what is true about the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And that is that no unmarked graves have been found on this site. And there's all sorts of distortions that are going on now to try to prevent us from understanding that. And so what I've done now is I've just gone into this post. And what we notice, first of all, I have posted the thread of 3 tweets that Dallas Brodie published on February 22nd, 2025. So that happened, I guess it's now a couple of weeks ago. And these posts are, as she said herself, Brodie, they're sterile, they're factual, there's nothing, any insults that are in there. It's just the plain facts, which are the number of confirmed child burials is 0. This is true. And the problem is that James Heller, who is a lawyer in British Columbia, in Victoria, who's trying to correct the record and have the word potential added to the full statement made by the Law Society that there were 215 burials at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. He just wanted to add potential to reflect the language that a Court of Appeal judge, Marchand, had used in a court case. So there's nothing controversial about it. It's in a judicial decision. Anyway, when he did this, he got all sorts of insults, and the Law Society fomented these insults, including that he was engaged in racism and discrimination, and he is now suing the Law Society. So we need to have the Attorney General and the Law Society of British Columbia take this matter seriously and deal with the terrible kinds of punishments that they are trying to level against James Heller, and they need to be held to account. So that's the backdrop that happened on February 22nd. On March 2nd, 2025, which was on Sunday, because we wanted to assist both Heller and Brodie, the research groups that I'm involved with all thought it would be a good idea to have an event so that we could discuss the issues that were involved. And if you want to look at the materials, there's a link there. The post is Barry Kirkham's presentation for the Truth and Law event that was held. And what happened is that Kirkham was not able to present on that evening or that afternoon because of Zoom problems. So what I did is I did an interview with him the next day and posted it on my SoundCloud. And so you can go and listen to that, or you can read the transcript of that interview. And then the whole event, the video of the whole event is available in this post, as is the transcript. So what we're trying to do is provide both transcripts and videos, because some people like to watch the video, some people like to read the transcript, and this just gives different options. And in this transcript, you will notice that there is about 4 pages that relate to the comments that were made by Dallas Brodie. So you can see exactly what she said that everyone's getting really upset about now. So that's in that post. And what I've done as well is in this post that I'm talking about right now, is I have taken her comments that were in that larger transcript and just posted them now, because what's happened is that Jim McMurtry, who himself has been canceled for trying to correct false information about the Kamloops Indian Residential School. This was a number of years ago in 2021. So it just keeps on going. All these people getting canceled. In my own case, of course, feeds into this. We want to know exactly what Brodie said, which people are taking issue with. And she is just stating that the facts are important, and we shouldn't have a law society that is forcing lawyers to take courses which have this false information in them. That's all she's saying. And she's defending James Heller. And she mentions that John Rustad, the leader of the Conservative Party, asked her to take the post down, which is absolutely absurd and a huge mistake, because if Brodie had been forced to take it down, she would look like she'd done something wrong, and she hasn't done anything wrong. And I think it's telling what Rustad said when she asked him why she should take it down. He said, well, people are upset. This is not how we should be running political institutions. We should not be pandering to those who are upset by things just because they're upset, because, of course, what this does is it just encourages the kind of bullying that we are seeing going on, whereby people become upset. It's called cry bullying. Also, the weaponization of empathy. People feel badly for what's happened to Indigenous people and the marginalization that's going on. And this allows these neotribal elites, who are very privileged people, who are not suffering from the problems that we see in isolated Indigenous communities. And in fact, these people are completely at ease interacting in the Canadian political system. what it does is it encourages these neotribal elites to be cry bullies, and we are never able to do things in a rational way because we always have to be concerned about how these neotribal elites are feeling about what's happening. And we just need to stand up to it. That's what we need to do. And I'm calling on everyone, do not cave like what is possible to happen, because then we're just going to see an amped up pressure for more nonsensical things happening in the political system. Now, what happened is that the clips from what Brodie said have been posted on Twitter. And of course, people have selected little bits, which they're pretty upset about, which of course, Brodie's done nothing wrong. So she's done nothing wrong. She had to talk off the cuff. She didn't have any prepared remarks. We didn't even know she was going to be speaking. And it was just because of Kirkham, his presentation wasn't happening. So Tom Flanagan suggested, why don't we get James Heller to comment? And then someone said, why don't we get, Dallas Brodie to comment? So she was called upon. She had to speak off the cuff. And she talked about how the anger that she's received from within her own party, and then refers to one of the colleagues who I'll talk about shortly, who sided with Boyle, Minister Boyle, to denounce Brodie on social media. And at this point, Brodie says, we need to have the truth, and it's not his truth, her truth, oh, my grandmother's truth, or, the whole thing about my truth and your truth and my truth. This stuff has to stop. It's like, it's got to be the truth. And then she talks about the legal system. She was a bit sarcastic in saying this, and so what? It deserves sarcasm. Sometimes people say stupid things like, I've got this, my truth, and you have your truth. Of course, this is just used selectively because they are trying to get us to argue that what they're saying is actually truth that we agree with. And this is not going to work. And this is what Brodie is talking about. There's just truth. None of us has it. We are searching for it, and we use reason, logic, and evidence to try to figure out what truth is. And in the Kamloops case, we don't have any evidence for unmarked graves, which would be clandestine because there's no cemetery in the Kamloops Indian Residential School. There is a cemetery across from the church on the reserve, and there are many unmarked graves in that cemetery. So if we really want to be locating where bodies are buried and so on, we should be looking at that cemetery, not at the Kamloops apple orchard. But because of a number of outlandish tales which have been fomented by Kevin Annett, who is a defrocked United Church minister who's been spreading these tales of horror, such as torture chambers, students being hung on hooks, and all sorts of things. This has been absorbed into the popular consciousness, and this is what's behind why people think there's bodies buried in the apple orchard. But not one parent has said that their child went missing from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And so it's highly improbable that there are remains there. Everyone keeps on talking about probable burials. It's not even probable. It's improbable. And we need excavations to figure out whether that's the case or not. And Brodie mentions this. There's been no digging, particularly in spite of the fact that millions of dollars have been spent, which is true. And as we'll see shortly, this was spent specifically for excavations. So it's not like we just spent money for healing circles and trauma-informed counseling or anything. We funded this with millions of dollars for excavations, and those excavations have not occurred. And Brodie goes on to say that this is just about the facts with respect to Kamloops. It's not about anything to do with the residential schools and how much abuse occurred there and how much harm was caused. Brodie is completely accepting that there were many mistakes that are made. There's a lot of sad incidents. But what she's saying is that the part about the unmarked graves has not been shown to happen yet, the clandestine burials. And until we have excavations, no one should be making these claims. And, this is causing, everyone who's saying this is divisive. The division was caused in May 2021 when the band claimed that the remains of 215 children. And then now we've just heard that the federal government has pulled funding from any further excavations. Why have we pulled the funding? We should pull the funding because we've already funded these excavations, which have never happened. And the excavations that have been done, Pine Creek, they said, the band said that they thought that there were bodies in the church basement. That was excavated and they found rocks in the church basement. So that's what is likely to be found at Kamloops, or the septic tiles that were laid in 1920s. That's when the septic tiles were laid. And if you're interested in that issue, CamRes, his website, Graves in the Apple Orchard. It shows the septic tiles, the layers, the rows of septic tiles on that site. And then Brodie, goes on to state that, if we're going to continue to move forward, so if we're going to progress, we have to have truth. We need to understand before we can figure out what to do about these situations. And she's just going to stand firm and say this has to be dealt with. We need to stand behind Dallas Brodie. Do not allow her to get canceled. And serious pressure needs to be placed on the political system in British Columbia to prevent that. And then she ends quite poignantly with, sort of statements such as, sometimes it's not easy to do the right thing. And she's just going to stand up and take the hits. And I have immense admiration for Dallas Brodie. And we need more people like her. But in order for there to be more people like her, she cannot fail. And if she gets canceled, it's going to make everyone else more and more afraid. And so we need to find inner strength and do what we can to support her situation. So that's the transcript. If you read her transcript, you'll find she has said nothing that deserves any kind of rebuke, but she is suffering from all these terrible insults that are now being made about her. Just a little bit of support, evidentiary support for Brodie, what the comments that Brodie made. This is about the excavations that she was talking about. We got a whole bunch of documents from Blacklocks, which were obtained from Freedom of Information, and we now know that approximately $9.3 million was requested by the Kamloops band for ancestral remains excavation. This is documented in the website the link that is there, and this is the Kamloops fraud video and transcript. So if you want to watch a video on what I've compiled about what appears to be fraud, you can take a look at that link. But anyway, here is the email on July 17th, 2021, talking about a call that was held on July 16th, which had a whole bunch of the Kamloops band people, Jeanette Jules, Katie Godfredson, Marie Baptiste, and then we have all the government officials. And we have this document here, which is a very important document. This is the application for funding request, and it says right on it, Kamloops Indian Residential School Ancestral Remains Excavation. And a lot of this is redacted, but we have that title. So we know what they requested funds for, and we haven't had any excavations yet. So why is that not happening? That is a huge question. And instead of going after Brodie, we should be going after the Neotribal Elites who are siphoning off money from what needs to go to the marginalized Indigenous communities where people are suffering from massive rates of fetal alcohol syndrome, terrible rates of violence, poor educational levels. Brodie actually just retweeted an article about the life expectancy for Indigenous people has dropped by 6 years because of the fentanyl crisis. These people, like Godfrey's sons, the Juleses, the Casimirs, they're not embroiled in the fentanyl crisis. They are raking off this money along with their lawyers. Many lawyers in that document, which was redacted, requests were made for legal support numerous times. So money is going to the lawyers. And as a result of this controversy, Brodie standing up in her corner and just demanding truth, there's a major split now in the Conservative Party in British Columbia because of that weak leader, Rustad. He is an embarrassment. And he should be standing behind Dallas Brodie and not pandering to the Neotribal Elites that he's brought in to his circle, which is going to have a very corrosive impact on politics and has already had a terrible corrosive impact. Anyway, Rustad is, let's be honest, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He starts speaking about things that he knows nothing about. And I don't know where he's getting information, but there's also sorts of false claims. For example, 4,000 children did not return home. This is not true. The 4,000 number is from the Memorial Register of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. That is children who died a year after they returned home, and names that had nothing to do with the residential schools added to memorialize them, such as Helen Betty Osborne, who was murdered by some men in the PA, but had nothing to do with the residential schools. So there's names like that on that banner. And he says that they died in residential schools. That's not true. We have the number from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's 423. That's the number of actual confirmed deaths at the residential schools. Children, there's a cemetery in every residential school. That's not true. And children were never sent home when they died. The bodies were not. That's not true. Initially, when schools were very remote and didn't have transportation, obviously this would have been very difficult. So they weren't sent home in those cases. But, more recently, in the 50s and the 60s, definitely they were sent home. And not all residential schools had cemeteries, and those that did often served the regions, the northern regions, and were attached to parishes and churches, which we're not surprised to see cemeteries in churchyards. That's what is associated with churches. So this is all misleading information that Rustad embarrasses himself by going into areas that he's not well educated on because he's listening to people like Sean Carleton who, have an agenda, to put it mildly. Okay, so that Rustad makes these comments. This gives his members of his party Worbis and Milobar to basically attack Brodie. Worbis, who's Indigenous, ironically says, inform yourself, get the latest facts, research, and talk to survivors. Getting the latest facts, like the fact is that the 0 bodies have been found. So what kind of facts is Worbis talking about? And talking to survivors, well, if we talk to survivors, Billy Coombs, who died a number of years ago, but he was a survivor He said that Queen Elizabeth II kidnapped 10 children from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. She'll be listening to what Billy Coombs said. And the Queen wasn't even in Kamloops in that year, which was 1964. And even if she were in Kamloops, the press follows the Queen around everywhere. She wouldn't be able to abduct 10 children. That's absurd. Yet we're supposed to listen to these kinds of stories which have no basis in any kind of evidence that can be verified. And this is what's got us into this problem, is believing highly improbable stories. And then we've got Peter Millibar, who is married to an Indigenous person and is connected to the Kamloops band. And, Manny Jules, we see the name Manny Jules. Manny Jules has been acting behind the scenes in many of these things and is putting pressure on the political system. And we need to stand up to this kind of lobbying, which is just about rent seeking, which is basically extracting funds and diverting funds for no productive purpose, and doesn't go to address what the funds should be addressing, which is the terrible conditions that exist. Manny Jules is a privileged Indigenous leader, as is all his family members, who are all very well positioned in the band. Then on February 27th, this is one of the most important documents. The British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, they wrote this unbelievable news release. And you just need to read this to understand what's wrong with politics in British Columbia and the difficulties when you accept the pressure from these organizations. And we have Roseanne Casimir talking about things in this press release. Roseanne Casimir has been completely discredited. Why should we listen to Roseanne Casimir at all? And she has the nerve to say things like acknowledging the truth is necessary for healing. And she's going into all sorts of things which have nothing to do with what Dallas Brodie says. She's talking about reclamation of our languages, which are vital to our cultural heritages. Brodie said nothing about reclamation of Indigenous languages. We must acknowledge the gravity of the traumas. Well, maybe so, but Brodie's talking about the fact that 0 remains have been found, 0 graves. What about that, Roseanne Casimir? What is your response to that? Terry Teague, all these Indigenous elites. Do you think that there's the remains of 215 children there? Do you think that the Canadians should be believing that? What's your position on that? And then they have the nerve to demand that John Rustad immediately remove MLA Brodie from the BC Conservative Caucus and publicly denounce her statements made regarding unmarked graves and burial sites. So her statement was that 0 graves had been found. So Rustad should publicly denounce that statement. This is incredibly irresponsible of these Indigenous leaders to be doing this. And the only reason why they're doing this is because people pander to them instead of standing up to them. If they're not stood up to, they'll continue to extract funding for purposes which are not being spent on the things that they should be spent on. And that's the whole problem with Indigenous politics, is we have all this diversion of funding to lawyers, to consultants, to Indigenous leaders, and we have terrible problems that continue, such as the drop in 6 years drop in life expectancy. And in terms of the potential unmarked burials, which is what everyone's upset at James Heller for saying, and what Dallas Brodie is trying to support Brodie for standing up against this false information, this was actually said by Kimberly Murray, who's the special interlocutor. So when she's talking about Kamloops, she says 215 potential unmarked burials. So what is so controversial about people saying potential unmarked burials? It doesn't make, well, it makes sense because it's a way of grievance mongering and diverting more transfers. but it makes no sense from the perspective of truth and ensuring that there's factual information. Another important thing that's happened is on March 3rd, 2025, Sean Carleton, who's a professor from University of Manitoba. All other academics have stopped commenting on the Kamloops case, it appears, and also this idea of residential school denialism. Carleton paints himself as a residential school denialism expert, and he just continuously comes back to the well and insults everyone, tries to damage people's reputations. This is his modus operandi. Anyway, there's a transcript of the latest interview that he's done, and I think it's important to look at this because it gives you a sense of the kinds of misinformation that Carleton is spreading. And so what he does is he actually supports Brodie's main point, which it's true that, that they haven't found any remains at Kamloops. So he says that. So he is, in fact, at odds with survivors Dee DeRose and Ted Gottfriedson Jr., which I have pointed out in the event on Sunday, who claim that remains have been found. But he also spreads a great deal more misinformation, which is what Carleton does. As I have said, he's an uber clown, and we shouldn't have to take him seriously, but we do have to take him seriously because he's the one who's always interviewed by the media. So it's his view that gets broadcast. And so he's relaying that Brodie, Heller, and others are trying to use the issue of Kamloops as a wedge issue. And then he relates that she said that the number of burials found is 0 and that no one should be afraid of the truth. That was Brodie's comment. And then he goes on to say, and the issue is that, of course, the Kamloops investigation into potential unmarked burials at the former Kamloops residential school site is ongoing. Well, they got $9.3 million almost 4 years ago now to do excavations. How's that going? The excavations. That hasn't happened. They got money to do it. What is taking so long? And we had Ted Gottfriedson and Manny Jules both say that the family heads had agreed to do the excavations. So that doesn't make any sense as to why they haven't done that. They have the whole area cordoned off as a sacred site. They have security watching over it. Are they just going to do that for the end of time, or are they going to actually put some shovels in the ground? And then Carleton has the nerve to go on and talk about how they haven't actually finished the investigation. And so Brodie's engaged in a right-wing strategy to try to deflect or distract public attention and to suggest that there are actually no deaths at the Kamloops residential school. Now, this is a bait and switch done by Carleton, and people should be aware of that, is that no one is denying that deaths occurred at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. In fact, Nina Green and Jacques Rillard have done a great deal of work on this, and there's actually 49 deaths that are documented, but 25 of those have been shown not to have happened at the school, and a number of death certificates are outstanding. So no one's saying that we're not going to find deaths. We know there's deaths there, but that's a completely different issue than clandestine burials. So that burials which are done in the cloak of darkness in the middle of the night, and children are woken up to dig the graves, and that there were murders that happened. That's not been substantiated at all, and it's an improbable hypothesis. It's not probable because 215 remains, clandestine burials. That's a lot of burials, and that's not going to be easy to do. It's hard just to dig one grave, and not to mention 215. And besides the 215 number, Sarah Bolio, in her presentation on July 15th, said that 15 of those 215 have already been discounted because those were shovel test pits done by the archaeology department. So this whole thing, it's got nothing to do with deaths which we know about. It's got to do with the sort of the insinuation that there are murders that have happened at Kamloops, which is not, there's no evidence for this at all. And so they're trying to shake public confidence in the Kamloops situation, says Carleton. And then he goes on to rewrite history, that the Kamloops band, in fact, was very tentative in what they said in their press release. And they talked about anomalies in their press release in May of 2021. And then people just misinterpreted what the Kamloops band said in their press release. Nonsense. Carleton is trying to stop the band from being held accountable. Everyone can look at this press release, which I posted here. It makes no mention of anomalies. Anomalies were what was put forward 3 years later. So they waited 3 years to correct the record. Meanwhile, it had all been deeply entrenched in the public consciousness. And they said that these missing children, the 215, were undocumented deaths, and some were as young as 3 years old. That's a very interesting question. Where did they get this idea of young as 3 years old? What are they talking about there? I don't understand it, what that is referring to. Anyway, take a look at that press release. This is what Carleton says is completely false. The band said remains have been found. That's why people misunderstood things. And there was an intention to do it. I've talked about this numerous times. There was a concerted effort by the band, by Tanya Talaga, by Raysel Coy, by Murray Sinclair to control information so that people would think that there were 215, the remains of 215 children. And besides, in September 2021 and October 2021, the Kamloops band repeated these things. One in at the, I think it's the BCAFN, yes, Assembly of First Nations. Casimir made a resolution saying that a mass grave was discovered at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. This was in September 2021. After Sarah Bolio made her presentation saying it was just anomalies and that this reflects a pattern of genocide. And then again, on October 18th, 2021, the family heads, they made a petition and repeated this falsehood, the confirmation of at least 215 unmarked graves of little ones who attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So that's some background on how Brodie is completely correct in what she's doing. People like Sean Carleton are either completely out to lunch and understanding what's going on, or they are intentionally trying to mislead people. We don't know which. They're either incompetent or corrupt. Which one is it? Anyway, then before we, I've just posted all the pile-on that has now happened because of Brodie's remarks that she made on on March 2nd. Nothing at all wrong with anything that she said, but we got, yes, she's mocking Indigenous residential school survivors. She made some sarcastic remarks about not your truth, not my truth, which isn't really referring to them either. Not your grandmother's truth. It's not your grandmother's truth. Your grandmother has an opinion, a belief, but until we have evidence, we cannot just take that as evidence of remains of children for the Kamloops Indian Residential School. This is this person, Wade Grant, who I believe is a liberal, running for the Liberals in BC. And he's trying to foment opposition to Brodie. Spencer Chandra Herbert, who is an MLA, NEP MLA. What is it? She's attacking her colleagues, right? Well, her colleague attacked her first. So that was the problem. If we're going to start pointing fingers, Brodie is entitled to defend herself. I'm getting, I find this to be really annoying that a whole bunch of people attack someone, the person defends themselves, and then they're accused of attacking people. This is not looking in the right direction at this situation. And then Dave Eby, this is outrageous. He says that, so Rustad's trying to say, this is a big tent. And he's saying, well, a big tent that has space for racism is not a political tent. That's a circus tent. And he's got a clown. You got to get a clown out of the tent. Eby is accusing Brodie of racism. This is unacceptable. What is the evidence of racism? Saying that someone is inferior and should have fewer political rights because of their race. What on earth has Brodie said that has any racist connotations at all? All she said is that there's zero, and she questioned this whole idea, saying that I have my truth and you have your truth, which is completely on point and is completely destructive to trying to understand things. The Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs. This is an embarrassing organization. This is Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. Stand up to these Neotribal Elites. They are privileged and they are siphoning money away from the marginalized Indigenous population. Sunner, NDP MLA, absolutely appalling. Racism and residential school denialism. Again, no substantiation for racism. That needs to be substantiated. They, in fact, should be sued for defamation as well, to be continuously calling someone a racist, engaged in racism. And they've said nothing racist at all. Utterly disgraceful. This is just hyperbolic nonsense. And then finally, those are all from the NDP. So they're the opposition, or they're the governing party. So that's not unexpected. Well, it's unexpected because of its defamatory character. But then we have Brennan Day, who, opportunistically is trying to, he thinks this is the way the wind is going to blow. And he's getting behind this toxic individual Warbus. Anyway, we need to make the wind blow the other way so that, we don't have pressure being placed on Brodie. We need to put pressure on Rustad. And then we have Carleton again. He never misses an opportunity to enter into this, and has his incredibly insightful remark that Jim McMurtry, who posted this video, shared the video, and Francis Widdowson, who hosted the event, are loud and proud residential school denialists. There can be no doubt about Brodie's connections. Well, my connection is that I stand behind Dallas Brodie. I think she's an incredibly brave person and needs everyone's support so that we can actually have truth about this issue and not this, what appears to be fraud occurring and more money being diverted to absurd searches for non-existent missing children. And this raises the question of what is a residential school denialist, and should one be loud and proud to be one? So I guess that depends on what one means by this terminology. And this is very confusing as to what a residential school denialist is. Carleton says distorting facts to undermine reconciliation. But as we've seen, Carleton is himself distorting facts. He claims that the band referred to anomalies in their May 2021 press release, and that everyone just misunderstood. They didn't read that press release carefully. If you read that press release carefully, you see that they're saying that the remains of 215 children have been found. He also says that the investigation is ongoing. Well, if the investigation is ongoing, we would have excavations, which it's taken almost 4 years to do anything, and it looks like that's not going to happen. So, and we have $9.3 million that was requested for excavations in July 2021. What I think is actually meant by residential school denialism is denial that the residential schools are genocidal. And I do deny that. I stand behind that 100%. I think saying that the residential schools were genocidal is not supported by evidence. We had no intent to exterminate a group, and the words cultural genocide were used by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's a nonsensical term, cultural genocide, because what we had is the coming together of hunting and gathering societies, which were pre-literate, that had no educational system, and modern nation states, which had reading and writing, and we had already had Galileo and all sorts of scientific progress. So of course, if we were going to have an educational system, it would have to be brought in by what's called the colonists, and that would destroy the pre-literate languages, which don't have any vocabulary to deal with modern concepts, and the animistic spiritual beliefs, and also the various ceremonies, which were many Indigenous people at the time, such as the potlatch, wanted to shut those ceremonies down because they were causing all sorts of problems in the modern context. So getting rid of, and this is what I said on a podcast in New Zealand, I've been accused of epistemicide, which is the killing of a knowledge system. I am completely in favor of epistemicide when we are talking about irrational beliefs, which prevents us from searching for the truth and having a wider understanding. So if residential school denialism is about supporting Dallas Brodie and her attempts to pursue the truth and have factual information about the Kamloops case, I am a loud and proud residential school denialist. Thank you very much for listening. Fight now and fight hard. Get behind Dallas Brodie. We have a serious chance to right the ship here with respect to the Kamloops case. Have a good day.